All right, so I just wanted to let you know, huge announcement. You might have seen the email before you joined this morning. The site annual conference at the Weston Riverwalk in San Antonio, Texas. Registration is now open. So if you have some budget dollars that you wanted to use up this year, the best thing you can do is to go to the website, insurancetrainers.org, and register today for the annual conference. You don't want to miss it. I've seen at the website that we have Lou Russell as a keynote, who's going to speak on a project charter in 45 minutes or less. If you don't know who Lou Russell is, she is a speaker and prolific author of practical training books. So a definite must-see event. I'm so happy to see her at our event. And then I always love it when we have comedians at site to bring a little bit of levity, but also provide some serious tips. We have Jan McInnes. She's going to be presenting on finding the funny in change, so that's always appreciated. Also, we're putting together the schedule for next year, site webinars in 2017. So if you have a suggestion for a topic or someone that you know who would make an excellent presenter for these monthly webinars that occur on the last Friday of each month, please do just have them reach out to site or myself, Sandra, at prepatomy.com, and I would love to put them on the schedule. All right, so those of you who have joined us early and are not familiar with the GoToWebinar virtual webinar tool, you're looking at the presentation screen right now. And somewhere on the right-hand side, if you're using a PC, you'll probably see a little orange arrow. That orange arrow opens and closes your control panel. And one of the things I like to tell people right off the bat is if you click on the View menu at the top and uncheck the Auto Hide control panel, this control panel will stay open on your screen and you can move it around and pop undock things like the question pod. But it's nice to have that open because we want you to use the question box to enter your name, your position, what kind of weather it's like where you are, anything that you'd like to share in the question box. And we do have some questions. We want you to contribute your expertise during today's session as well. If you're on VoIP, voice over internet, using mic and speakers, a headset's great. If you start to have a little bit of audio issues, I would try closing down other running programs like internet browsers and also email programs really take up a lot of bandwidth that can affect your audio. You can easily switch to the telephone there and dial the phone number, access code, and remember to put in that 2-digit PIN, and that will give you the best audio if you're having some bandwidth issues. It happens a lot if you dial in via wireless for these virtual classroom type events. The question box, I already see that Ashley has said hello from sunny Florida. And yes, Deborah. And Greg is here. All right. Good to see you. Greg is from Southern California. So keep on entering your name and where you're calling in from. We might do a quick poll where we ask you to raise your hand. We also use the raise your hand too. We want to hear from you, and I can unmute your line individually. So please keep in mind, we want to capture your expertise as well. So be prepared to be put on the spot in just a little bit. And finally, for those of you who are guests or new to site, we want to let you know that we're excited that you're with us today. And we also want you to consider ways for you to get involved with site, whether it's by joining site as a member, or if you're a member, finding a way to grow more with site by getting involved. Site has unlimited benefits of membership, and as you can see on the screen, we'd love for you to get connected today. Site's a great place to network with people in similar roles as yours. Professional networking has a way of becoming a great tool when you least expect it. The relationships you sow today may yield success in the future. So visit our website, insurancetrainers.org, for membership information. And the contacts of the board are also there, and we hope you will join us. So having said that, it is my pleasure to introduce Steve Martin, ITP. He's presented at the last 2 site conferences. He is a talent development specialist at Century Insurance, and you are just going to really enjoy today's session. And Steve, we're so appreciative of you sharing your expertise and talents with us today. So welcome back to site.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate everyone coming out on a Friday to come and listen to this session. Those of you who saw the name Steve Martin, hopefully you weren't thinking about the other one, but if you were, we'll try to have a little bit of fun. We'll try to add a little bit of humor throughout the time. But you know what? I'm really excited to be bringing the topic of generations to this group. It's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, pretty much for the last 10 years now. So as Sandy said, we are going to ask that you kind of participate through the next 45 or so minutes through either the question pod or by raising your hand, and Sandy will unmute you, because we'll be asking some engaging questions and asking for your feedback. So let's all learn together where I'm not just doing the talking head for the next 45 minutes so that we can keep you all engaged. So let's take a look at what we're in for in our time together. So the first objective is to really identify the 4 generations found in the workplace. We're going to kind of speed through that. If you were in Minneapolis with me, we spent an awful lot of time talking about each of the generations. If you haven't done a lot of research, we'll give you just enough to be dangerous, because I want to spend a little bit more time on how this applies to us in the training world. Second objective, understand each generation's characteristics, preferences, stereotypes, and then really discover a new way of thinking that's going to break down those barriers and allow you to work more effectively and efficiently with each of these generations, especially in our world, the world of training. So, as I said, I've been really looking into generations for about 10 years or so, and the question comes up a lot of times, why the heck should I care about generations? So I found this data, and I'm going to share this with you. 1995 numbers in the workforce, and these are in millions. And then on the right-hand side, we have 2015 numbers in the millions. Along the bottom of each circle, you have each of the generations represented, traditionalists being the oldest of the generations, moving down to the youngest, being the millennials. And on the right-hand side, the 2015 numbers in the workforce, again in the millions, traditionalists on the left, and working towards the millennials on the right-hand side. So I'm going to give you a moment, just kind of take a look at this data. And then what I'd like to hear from you, again, feel free to share it on your question pod or raise your hand and Sandy can unmute you, but I'd like to take a couple ideas as to why should I care about the generations based upon this slide.
I was kind of shocked just looking at the numbers. In 20 years, from 1995 to 2015, you went from 1 million of millennials to 53 million millennials in the workforce. That is just an astronomical number.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Claire is saying, it reveals my customers, those who attend the webinars I connect. And Sean is saying, each generation learns differently. Chris is saying,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Chris is saying not only different learning styles, but different learning preferences for the various generations.
Thank you.
Yep. Amy's saying it helps us to understand each other. And Greg is saying you have to know your target audience in order to meet their needs.
Absolutely. Thank you. So yeah, let's actually dig into this a little bit. And those are all great ideas, and I'm going to be asking you to continue to share answers to the questions and the comments that were just raised as we go through this. But if you look at the numbers, people are wondering why there's such a huge focus on generations. And if you go to generations classes or you do some generational research, you're going to find that there's a real heavy emphasis on the younger generations. And I think the slide really represents why that is, because as you said, you know, going from 1 million to 1995 to 53 million in 2015 is an astronomical amount of people. And what we find is that there are approximately 70 million boomers. There's only about 35 to 40 million Gen Xers. And then there are about 70 million millennials. Okay, and so what we're going to find is that as the boomers and the traditionalists move out of the workforce, we have as many Gen Xers as we are going to have. You know, some are in the workforce, some are not in the workforce, but we've got pretty much what we've got. And it's a smaller generation bookended by two much larger generations. And so the millennials are coming into the workforce and they're licking their chops going, wow, there is a ton of opportunity for me. And so that's why we're really starting to focus on these generations and how can we comfortably transition the knowledge of the older generation to the younger generation as the older generations leave the workforce. So if you're not sure exactly where you fall in the generations, take a look here. I've got the different years. And the definition of the generation is, where do I fall based upon my birth year? So traditionalists, they're going to fall basically between 1920 and 1940. The boomers are between 40 and 60. Xers are 60 to 80, and the millennials, you can see, are 1980 to 2000. Now, if you do your own research, you're going to see your research will be approximately this, maybe plus or minus 3 to 5 years. I like to keep it on the decade. It makes it so much more simple to remember. So, before we dig into exactly what the characteristics of each of these generations is, we need to examine what we call paradigms. Now, a paradigm is a mental map. It's our mindset. It is what really drives our behavior. The way I think about the world is really going to drive how I respond to the world. Ultimately, that's going to get me the results I have based upon my behavior. So let's look at a couple different paradigms that we have heard in the workforce from leaders. So we call the first one the mediocre leader. I didn't say bad leader, I said mediocre leader. And the mediocre leader might say, I recognize that there are some differences in the generations, but it doesn't impact the workplace or training room that much. And so if we think about that mindset, this leader probably isn't going to do a whole lot when it comes to generations and the generational conflicts that they see, and therefore they're not going to get real great results. However, research would tell us also that at least 60% of companies say that they are experiencing some sort of generational conflict within the workforce. And so if we're going to have good results, we need to then establish the great leader mindset, saying that understanding and leveraging the differences in each generation is really key to unlocking everyone's full potential. So seeing each individual as an individual and treating them as such. So let's dig a little deeper into the paradigms and start examining your own personal paradigms. This is where I'm going to ask you to actually do a little participation. In a moment, Sandy's going to put up a poll here, but let me walk through what we're going to do here. I just want to see where everybody stands with their own paradigms about a couple different issues in the workplace. So the first one we're going to talk about is, how do I see work-life balance? Number one, I need to slow down a bit. Number two says, I am sandwiched taking care of parents and children. I need to make it all work. Number three says, I want to enjoy life now, not just when I retire. And number four says, I'm not working all the time like my parents and then trying to make up for it on vacation. So those are four different paradigms, four different mindsets that someone might say with regard to how do I see work-life balance. And so I'd like Sandy to just pull up the poll and please answer based upon your own mindset. How do you personally see work-life balance? Vote 1, 2, 3, or 4. 1, again, I need to slow down a bit. 2, I'm sandwiched, taking care of parents and children. 3, I need to enjoy life now, not just when I retire. And 4, I'm not working all the time like my parents and then trying to make up for it on vacation.
And we're doing pretty good. We're up to 74% voted. Let's see if we can get to 95. I feel confident about this group. I think they're really engaged. 88, come on.
Absolutely.
I'll do a countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we got to 88%. So let me go ahead and close the poll and share the results. This is really interesting. So we have 33% that say I need to slow down a bit. 10% I'm sandwiched, taking care of parents and children. 47% I want to enjoy life now, not just when I retire. And then 10% I'm not working all the time like my parents and then try to make up for it on vacation. Very interesting.
Okay, very good. Yeah, and thank you for sharing. And now the interesting piece comes up. And if I advance the slide here, you're going to see stereotypically where each of the generations fall with their mindsets. And so what I'm going to ask you now, and we're going to have another poll here in just a second, is I'm going to ask you, based upon how you responded, did you personally match the generation that you fall into by date? So if we could pull up that poll, again, I'm asking, did you actually match your own personal generation and the generation that you fall in by birth date?
This is really interesting. Let's see if we can get to the 88% at least that we had originally
Absolutely.
voted. I'll give you a countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so let me share the results here. So 43% yes and 57% no, they did not match.
Interesting, very interesting. So, I think there's a lot to be said about that, but let's hang on to that thought a little bit and do it just one more time on another topic. So here's another topic that's big within the workforce, and the question is, what motivates me at work? Number 1 says, I do what I have to do so I can give my family a better life. 2, I work hard and get ahead. 3, I work as hard as I have to and get a life. 4, I work but make a difference. So again, 1, I do what I have to so I can give my family a better life. 2, I work hard and get ahead. 3, I work as hard as I have to and get a life. And number 4, I work but I make a difference. So vote. Let's see if we can hit that 88% again.
Ooh, this is going to be interesting. I get to watch the percentages change as you vote, and this one's going to be really interesting. Okay, last chance to weigh in. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, close the poll. I'll share the results. And this time, 27% said, do what I have to do. 17% work hard and get ahead. 17% work as hard as I have to and get a life. And 40% work but make a difference. That is very interesting.
Very interesting. Absolutely. Yeah. I love it. And so once again, let's actually go to the generations now, and you'll see where the generations stereotypically say. So let's pull up that second poll. Once again, did you match your own personal generation based upon your birth year? Let's answer that yes or no.
Oh, wow. Okay, last chance to weigh in. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Can you believe we tracked 88% on every single poll? This is really interesting.
I love
now,
it.
This time, 73% did not match their birth year. And I'm wondering if that has to do with making a difference. I mean, and there's a couple of great comments here. Sean is saying they think they might fall between 1 and 2. And Bill made the comment, over half didn't fall into their category because the categories are stereotypes and people are individuals. Ooh, great point. And then Greg saying, I think this may be skewed because people in training want to make a difference. Oh my gosh, I think that's a great point. That's great.
It's a very good point. In fact, what's kind of interesting is on this particular question, I agree, in the training world, we want to make a difference. But what you'd find is when I ask people across my organization, and our training department's relatively small compared to the entire organization, you're going to see the same results. And what this tells us is that with this particular question, we do see that some generations actually do influence other generations. And so I think we found that on the first question as well. And I'd like to go back to the comment that was said, these are stereotypes, and I can't agree with that enough. And in fact, that's what I want to pull up here is the generational definition, and that's a great segue to this definition, because you'll see the definition of generation says a group of individuals, most of whom are the same approximate age, having had similar social influences, having similar ideas, problems, attitudes, etc. And you see I highlighted most of whom are the same, approximate age, having had similar social influences, similar ideas, problems, attitudes, etc. So absolutely, in some of these types of situations, we are going to see that it is a generational issue. But what I want to tell you is as we go through the generational content, that doesn't mean that everything you encounter in our day-to-day is a generational issue. So what we don't want to do is say, okay, you're older than me, so therefore I'm going to put you in this generational box and treat you as such. But I think a lot of these characteristics that each of the generations has is really something that we can put into our toolbox and use in our day-to-day and especially in our training world. And so let's actually take a look at each of the generations. Once again, I'm going to kind of breeze through the snapshots, giving us a sense of each of the generations, so that once again we can spend a little bit more time on what can we do with this content in the training world. So traditionalists, this is the oldest generation. They came of age during the Great Depression and World War II. So if you ask a traditionalist, what are the two words that would define your generation, you would see it in the second bullet there, driven by ideals of duty and sacrifice and loyalty. This is a generation that sacrificed. You can see they grew up in the Great Depression. They are also very loyal people. This is a generation that typically worked for one and only one company. So they place a lot of faith in institutions. And as we know, through time, that paradigm, that mindset has certainly changed. But traditionalists, they embrace that. And here's another interesting one. They value quality over speed and efficiency. And once again, as you can tell, as time has progressed, what are you always told? We need it faster. Okay, we need everything faster. I need more. And the traditionalists, again, stereotypically, struggle with that. The boomers, this is the original me generation. Now, what does that mean? That means that the media was typically on this generation as they grew up, when they were born. It was the baby boom. Now, as they've gotten older, many of them to retirement age, the media is on them. We're talking about all these systems. How are we going to put these systems in place and keep these existing systems to make sure that this generation, over 70 million of them, can retire effectively and still have plenty left for the rest. They came of age during the post-war prosperity, Cold War in the 60s. So again, they focused on prosperity. Things were good. We heard the term keeping up with the Joneses. Okay, this is a generation where things were great. Women went to work, equal rights. And unfortunately for Generation X, that created what we call the latchkey kid. Over the years, they built these great companies. They're now in charge. They're typically at that higher level within the organizations. This is a generation that really the work ethic was measured in face time. The mantra for this generation was live to work. It was about the time I spent at work, the face time. Average work week of a baby boomer was typically 54 hours a week. As that progressed, the mantra of live to work transitioned to work to live. Next one, committed to team. Why teamwork? Well, there are over 70 million of these folks. So it was almost a forced teamwork. This created a bit of competitive edge, but also a lot of collaboration. This is a generation that likes to work together. Concerned with status and individuality. So titles for this generation are meaningful. Sometimes the baby boomers, again stereotypically, would prefer to have that title over an increase in wages. This individuality also did set them apart from the millions of their peers. Generation X. This is a generation that questions authority and institutions. So we know that the traditionalists, they were all for institutions. But as time progressed, we now had this very cynical generation now questioning authority. They watched institutions lay off their parents, eliminate pensions, saw jobs heading offshore, stock market crash of '87, ushering in a recession. So not a real positive generation. Unfortunately, they are not very loyal to companies. This is a generation that's very loyal to people. It brought in that whole mindset of people leave managers, not companies. I also mentioned that this is a cynical generation because of what they grew up with. They're not fans of hierarchy. They like the equal. They prefer open and honest communication. This is a generation that grew up with technology. They understand technology. So they embrace it. They understand it. And this is a generation that also focuses on efficiencies. Again, it kind of flies in the face of the traditionalists. So Generation X, again, very tech savvy. They moved from the 50-hour work week to the 40-hour work week. Yes, they'll put in the extra time, but only if it means more output rather than just face time at work. The millennials, let's take a look at them. So this is a generation that I hear people say has a very entitled mindset. Well, if you understand how they grew up, you'll understand why they have such a sense of entitlement. So let's go through that. They were coddled, protected from birth. This is where the helicopter parent came into play. The parent was more of a friend, and they wanted to protect their child. They wanted a positive attitude for their child. So you hear the mindset, everyone gets a trophy. Extremely tech savvy, they just get it. Whereas Generation X grew up with it, this generation doesn't know a life without it. They gravitate to people who can help them achieve their goals. They are very goal-driven. This is the generation that really wants to change the world. And they'll do it with your help if you're willing to give it to them. But they're going to look for people who can help them. They seek open, constant communication. They want feedback constantly. Whereas feedback for the traditionalists was no news is good news, this generation wants it and they want it constantly. They're torn between the desire for individuality and the need to fit in. This is another very, very large generation, much like the baby boomers. They want individuality, but they really like that pack mentality. And this generation, because the world through technology has gotten so much smaller, they consider the global impacts of decisions. So that is a quick snapshot. Again, my intent was to breeze through that so we can focus on the next step. So the big question is, how do we engage each of these generations? So once again, I've done enough talking, so I want to hear from you. Doesn't necessarily have to be specific to generations, but I'm just wondering, in the training world, what are you doing in your companies to engage your learners? Again, maybe generationally impacted, maybe not. But what have you done? I'm going to open it up to comments. Again, you can throw it in the question pod, or you can raise your hand and we can unlock your audio.
And I know we have a lot of expertise here, and I'm sure there's a few of you who have put great thought into development of your programs that appeal to the different paradigms or mindsets or generations. So please do raise your hand. Let's see if we can get at least one brave soul who I can unmute their line and you can share what you're doing. We're all trainers and educators here. Low risk for raising your hand. Yay! I knew it, Amy. Okay, let's welcome Amy. Superstar. Thank you, Amy.
Sure, you're welcome. I think one of the things I've really noticed and actively try to use is a lot of video, not a lot, but video clips, effective, short, video clips to add variety to the training. And of course, I think most of us are probably really focusing on engaging people, high participation, facilitating versus telling so much, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So you use videos, and you said short videos. Do you have kind of a preferred length? I mean, are they 1 minute? Are they 5 minutes? 10? Does it vary? What have you noticed?
The ones I use that I think are most effective tend to be about 2 to 3. If it there are some good ones I think that are longer, and if you're going into more depth, but I found 2 to 3 minutes seems to be the best that I've discovered.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
Thanks, Amy. It is amazing. Just think about how much you use videos in your personal life to solve problems, everyday problems. My uncle, he has a new puppy and wants to figure out how to train it to reduce licking. It's licking his face, and that's like a response from the wolf pack where the wolf would come back and regurgitate the meal. It's kind of in their DNA to do that. And so I found a training video for him that he can use to learn how, some techniques he can use to keep the dog from licking his face all the time. But we use videos all the time for everything. So I'm just curious, raise your hand if you've used videos to solve a problem in the workplace. I'll make it a little bit harder there. Used a video to solve a problem in the workplace. So we have a couple of people. Okay, very good. And Steve, let me get your comment on some of these things that our folks have shared. Kathleen is saying she's trying to do more with hands-on rather than downloading.
So hands-on versus downloading. So downloading meaning I'm the talking head downloading onto the learner? Is that what she means?
Or it could be, downloading something from a website or whatever. But yeah, or it could be either. Hands-on.
Yeah, hands-on is I've noticed in the training world that hands-on, at least at Century, is becoming a very critical piece. And what we're finding is we're moving more towards application in the training room, the physical training room, and we're now pushing some of the quick learn. Okay, hey, I want to just know the characteristics of the generations. How can I do that? And maybe we would use a video, or maybe we would create a brief e-learn, and they would actually go through that even prior to coming to the class itself. And then in the class, yeah, it's all hands-on, and the trainer really takes more of a back seat, and it's more of a facilitation. And we're just starting to head in that direction, which is really exciting.
Sean,
so I'd be curious if oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, Sean is offering classes in different formats, and Brenda said shifting from the heavy live instructor-led training and shifting to e-learning videos, etc., to serve two purposes: another learning style, and then a just-in-time training when they need it and that when she's not available.
Oh, so yeah, when she's not available, they have these quick hits where they can just do it on their own time. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And actually, millennials, and we'll get into this, but millennials, what we find is they're willing to put in the time, right? So it's not about them not wanting to work. It's more about them wanting to work on their own time. They've been known to put in 60, 70 hours a week, but you know what? I don't want to come into work until 9 because I'm not talking to any customers until 9. And then I'll put in a few hours, grab some lunch, and then I'll work the rest of the night. And so to be able to do those little quick hits late in the evening when the facilitator trainer's not around, that really does tap into some specific people. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'll just share two more.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I'll share two more participant comments, and I'll let you move on to some really specific ideas in addition to these. So Deborah's saying she's working with a millennial class right now, providing more opportunities for small group collaborative problem solving, and it's been successful. So great job, Deborah. And Clara is offering the flipped classroom approach as an alternative for Xers and millennials, where you basically they're doing all of the classroom work out there on their own, and then when you come together, that you're actually applying all of that presentation lecture stuff that you might have learned in a video, and you come to a live event, then you're actually applying it. So great point, Clara.
Yeah, no, actually, I would love to hear a little bit more about that one if Clara would be willing to share. Is it something that she just started, or is it something that she's been doing?
Yeah, Clara, you're on the phone, so would you mind raising your hand to give me permission to unmute your line, and we'll hear from you. There you go. Thanks, Clara. How are you?
I'm fabulous. How about you?
Great, great. So tell us a little bit more about your flipped classroom.
Well, I don't have a lot to tell you yet because it's going to begin in 2017. In fact, I'm just setting up my class topic schedules for the first half of 2017, and we're beginning by doing the half flipped, where I send them materials, they're going to study, review them, and then we are going to meet via webinar. And because we're doing these for state continuing ed credits, there has to be certain topics covered in detail. It'll be a mixture of them asking questions and me responding and making sure the material is covered so we satisfy the state requirements. So we'll see how it goes, and then we'll move into the total flipped classroom, hopefully in 2018.
Excellent. Thank you. Any comments, Steve?
No, that's really exciting. You know, and one thing I love about training sessions is sometimes the facilitator can actually learn something too, because as I said, that's something that we're heading in the direction of, and it's really exciting to hear another person that's dabbling in that. So just to hear that feedback is great. So I think a lot of times we can all learn from each other. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. So let's actually move on. I appreciate everyone's feedback and ideas. And what I want to do now is spend the last bit of our time going through what I came up with in my research on what we can do and what we can think about when we're dealing with each of the generations. Again, as I go through this, not every single issue that we deal with is a generational issue. So these are all just ideas for you to think about if indeed you are dealing with a generational situation. So let's talk about the traditionalists. And really, as I go through these slides, you're going to see what is the answer? How do I tap into these generations? And I think it's really globally. Whether it's generations, personalities, genders, whatever, it's really about giving them what they want. It's kind of a win-win situation. You want engaged learners, so let's give them exactly what they want. Now, the difficulty is there's so many differences. How do we do it all at once? So here's some ideas. And again, pick and choose as you're going through your training world. First one, we know that this generation really thinks about credibility. They think about the hierarchy. So remember, in the past, traditionalists worked for one company only. The hierarchy was there. How do I become your CEO? I have to spend more years in the company to get that. So to establish credibility, it's really important for this generation to tell them, what are your credentials? This generation, much like boomers, title is important, as are those wonderful letters next to your name. So here's that little plug for the ITP. Are you the ITP? You know, do you have those letters next to your name? In the training world, that might weigh heavily on a traditionalist. In the insurance world, are you a CPCU? You know, just those letters next to your name is going to weigh heavy on a traditionalist. Your title, do you introduce yourself as a talent development specialist senior, or do you introduce yourself as a trainer? There would be a difference with this generation. How much time and effort went into your training? You know, did you take a decent amount of time to put together the training, or did you go for efficiency? Remember, this generation is more about quality over efficiency. So if you can talk about the quality behind your research, That's very important. Which goes into your methods. Validate your content. Did you talk to certain experts, and who were they? And again, what is their title? Do they have a designation? And then, did you go to Harvard Business Review or some startup company? What materials did you use in your research? And lastly, continue to emphasize you and your credibility. Continue to emphasize the fact that you know what you're talking about. Traditionalists, all about respect. However, traditionalists, their definition of respect is a little bit different. Okay? It's automatic. If you're older, you should be respected. So, how do we respect a traditionalist if maybe we're a younger generation? It's really simple. Ask them for their input. Assuming you know is not going to help with trust with this generation. They have a lot of years with the company. Remember, they typically only work for one company. And they really do think their sacrifices, their hard work, their seniority, that has earned them a bit of authority and respect. This generation is typically less likely to offer feedback. So again, asking them is important. Feedback to them growing up was no news as good news. So ask for their input. Secondly, don't assume they are technologically incompetent. Okay? Many of them have learned technology, but maybe they're not as competent with the current technology as some of the younger generations. So diagnose their capabilities before you proceed. Maybe ask them a few questions. Get them comfortable. This generation tends to respect and follow rules. Rules exist to help everyone succeed. So determine what rules they have in their head. What is their paradigm? What is their mindset when it comes to ground rules for a training class or a webinar? And then determine if those rules or those paradigms will drive the results that you want. If not, well, then have a conversation around that. How can we get them to see things the same way that we see things? So there's a few things that you can think about for the traditionalists. Traditionalists in most of our companies, real small percentage. Baby boomers also, we're starting to see them retire. So they're starting to head out the door, but we still have a lot of baby boomers in the workforce. So again, give them what they want. What do they want? This generation values team. Okay? For them, team is almost assumed. Can you incorporate group activities? We talked about that. Group activities is really, really important to the millennials. But you'll find that baby boomers actually do share some qualities of the millennial generation. So again, can you incorporate some sort of group activities where they can work together? But think about a nice balance. Again, this generation, the me generation, they like to show their individuality. There's a little bit of an ego competition in this generation, so include some individual treatment. Make it a nice balance. This is a very optimistic generation. So if you fall in the Generation X, and if you are a stereotypical Generation X, I say be cautious. Because you have two generations, baby boomers and millennials, that tend to be very optimistic. So when you're speaking, speak positively, stay positive. This generation also likes titles, awards, accomplishments. Can you tell them how the training will lead them towards that? So continuing education, designations. Talk to them about the end in mind. How is this going to help them towards that designation or towards those CE credits? Technology, much like the traditionalists, they may know technology, but again, stereotypically, they may not be as comfortable with newer technology as the younger generation. So if you're going to use technology, do it for a reason and keep it simple. This generation really likes that human touch. I know a lot of things are moving to electronic, reliant upon technology, But if there's any way that you can incorporate that human touch, do so. Sandy and I were talking before the webinar about what we're doing with technology. My company, we're working more towards the video, adding cameras, and we're actually even leaning now more towards complete full-blown video conferencing where you see the entire person. And it just helps us to be able to see the nonverbals, the smiles, the confusion, and we can react accordingly. Generation X. This is a very different generation than the baby boomers and the millennials. We know that they grew up in a little bit more negative environment, and so this generation is a little skeptical of things due to their upbringing. They've been hit with the slick advertisements, so they've really got a detector on them going around, can I trust you? Can I trust what you're saying? So with this generation, be straightforward, be clear, don't sugarcoat things. And also, this generation, they really will assume, stereotypically, that something's going to go wrong. So offer what the backup plan is. What is plan B? What are their options with the training? Okay, if plan A doesn't work, what is my plan B? Xers are fiercely loyal to the people they trust. Again, this generation is the generation that will leave managers, not companies. Once you build that trust, they're going to be loyal and fiercely loyal. But as you're building that trust, make sure that your facts are accurate. They will check on you to make sure that they can trust you. Xers don't typically jump right into decisions. They're a little more skeptical. Be ready to answer their questions. Watch the nonverbals. And then provide the information they need. Patience is very important in this generation to get them on board so that you can trust them. But once you trust, and once they trust, you've got a fiercely loyal person. Technology, I've kind of run this one through the whole line of generations. Technology, this generation is very comfortable with technology. However, the technology you use, they're going to expect that you are comfy using that technology as well. So if you're going to use the technology, you might want to make sure it's working prior to going into that, because if you start having a lot of technological errors, you might lose them. Now, obviously, we know things happen, but that's why Plan B is so critical. And lastly, the millennials. This is a generation that has always been told how wonderful and special they are. So they come into our organizations with self-esteem and confidence, but they can lose it very easily. I like to say that this generation imprints as they come in because they've had the helicopter parent always helping them make decisions. And now they're coming in, the parent is not there, and so now they're looking for answers. They're asking a lot of questions and they're expecting the answers. It's a very large generation, but they do crave individuality. So treat them as an individual, answer their questions, and get them confidence so that their self-esteem and confidence stays high. Much like baby boomers, very pure-oriented. So again, can you incorporate some sort of activity? Maybe some networking activities. This is a generation that really gets involved in different networks in their communities. How can you build that into your learning? Always give them feedback. How are they doing? Are they doing well? If you're doing e-learning, if you're doing webinars, can you do those little quick checks and balances and give them rewards along the way? It may not be as important to a traditionalist or a baby boomer, but this generation really likes the badges. You know, badgification is a new thing and becoming very, very popular. Can we incorporate that? This generation wants to change the world. How will this learning benefit me, not only me, but also others? Can I apply this learning immediately? Not only at work, but also outside of work in my networking. I'm a free agent as a millennial. How can I use this to help me go places? You know, maybe within our organization, and unfortunately, maybe outside the organization. This is kind of a free agent generation. And then technology. They are dependent on it. They are experts in most technology. Don't just use advanced technology just to impress. They like to make sure that you're using the right technology for the right reasons. And then this generation, the Xers started the work-life balance. Millennials have really taken it to the next step. They strive for that true work-life balance. They like to work their own hours at their own pace. Can you offer that flexibility like we just talked about with the flipped class, with just-in-time training? Can we offer that? And this generation likes it quick. We talked about the 2-minute videos. I think that's great. This generation doesn't have the attention span like the older generations. So can you keep things moving, especially in a virtual environment? Really, when it all comes down to it, one of my favorite quotes by Zig Ziglar, you can have anything in life you want, provided you help enough other people get what they want. As I said throughout each of those, it's really about getting them what they want. What is their preferred method of learning? And we know that there are multiple generations within our classes, within our learning. How can we incorporate all of them and continue to change things up and in the end tap into their comfort zone so that they're engaged throughout the entire class? So I want to thank you for your time, and I do have a few minutes if there are any questions, any comments. Again, if you have comments on what you're doing, I'd love to hear that as well, because I think some of the best learning happens from the participants as well. But I'll shut up, and I will invite questions and comments at this time.
No, please do not shut up, Steve. I love listening to you about this topic. So important. Hey, before you dash off, please, please, please enter into the question box right now. What's a key idea or a key insight that you're going to take away and really try to think about and incorporate into your training? I really want to know what that is. A key idea or a key insight that you're going to take away. And Amy, I see your raised hand. I'll unmute your line in just a moment. And I want to share a comment that Deborah made. She said, I found it interesting that you said, Steve, boomers and millennials are much alike. I've noticed that too. She thinks, or she says, when you think about it, boomers raised the millennials. So I thought that was really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm. And what's funny is the one difference between boomers and millennials is that entitlement mentality. They come in with a sense of entitlement. They want to be your CEO in 6 days, right? Mm-hmm. And that frustrates the boomers, but then the boomers have to step back and look in the mirror and go, oh, wait, I kind of created that. Mm-hmm. But, you know, in my research, what I've noticed, and I've thought about that too, how do these two generations stay really optimistic? And I think, again, my personal opinion, where it comes down to, is the boomers grew up in a very good environment economically, you know, financially, things were great, and so they were optimistic that way. Millennials, you know, we look at it, you know, there's horrible things going on in the world. How can they stay so optimistic? Well, as we know, they have the very positive helicopter parent really conditioning them to say, you know what, life is great, life is short, live it to the fullest, you are wonderful, and you can be anything that you want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, so true. Very good. Well, let me unmute Amy. Let's hear from Amy.
Yeah, I just wanted, Steve, I wanted to acknowledge you for covering an overview of all the generations. And the reason I say that is that I've noticed, I incorporate generations in a lot of different training, but what I've noticed is certain groups that I speak to are getting really angry when they just hear about the millennials. And it's actually, I think, driving some of the conflict. Ooh. Because some of the other generations feel like, hey, what about me? What about how I'm different? How come nobody talks about me? So I just want to make that comment that I think it's pretty important that we overview the generations.
Right.
And you know, that's a very, very good point. And if I could comment on that, what I usually say, I do teach a generations class at my company, Century, and I always start the class by saying, you know what, we are going to talk about each of the generations, but understand this, and this is why I put up that first slide with the circles. We got to understand that the boomers are leaving the organizations. The traditionalists, at least with my company, we have very few. The Generation Xers, we have all of the Xers in the workforce, you know, except for a handful here and there. So what do we have to do? We have to really transition that knowledge of the boomers to the millennials. And the millennials, you saw from 1 million to 53 million. Why are we focusing on them? Because there's so many of them, and we're going to be very dependent upon that generation because there isn't enough Generation Xers to fill the positions that the boomers are leaving. And so that's, I kind of explained that. So if there is a heavy focus on the millennials, and I tell the millennials, buckle up, it's going to be a bumpy ride because we're going to be focusing on you pretty heavily. But understand that that's kind of why. You know, Xers, there was billions of dollars spent on Xers when they came into the organization, but there's so many less.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too. It was so important when you talked about paradigms and mindsets. So when you talked about the generations and then you overlaid it with the paradigms and mindsets, and if we could talk about our own paradigms and mindsets and get an assessment of that rather than, you know, you were born in this year to this year, this year to this year. So I thought that was a really good point. So, oh my gosh, your points that you're sharing in the question box. Thank you so much, everyone. Let's see here. Amy said, give them what they want is her key insight and takeaway. La Junta said, I will definitely incorporate short videos and gamification moving forward into the new year. John said, I'm going to try to incorporate more videos in my presentations. Like it. Clara says, I'm re-energized and refocused on moving into the 21st century with my approach to teaching. Love it. Kathleen says, I found this information very thought-provoking. It's going to help me looking at the group I'm working with to make sure I address each generation accordingly. I like that. Catherine, key insight is the best way to give the generations what they want to tie directly to the success of the training. Excellent point. Brenda says, when we put together focus groups, ensure that we are inclusive with the various generations and perspectives. It's too easy to continue with the same group of people reviewing items. I like that. Ashley says, just a thought, but there is a lot of criticism of the millennial generation. This happened with the Gen Xers as well. They were unmotivated, but as we age, the strengths start to shine. Ooh, I like that. That is, yeah, give them time. They're still growing up. I mean, really, when you're going to work, that's different than going to school and just the everyday workaday world and learning that. You learn that all through your 20s, and it's hard. George says, we are moving towards developing training for mobile learning. I tell you, this digital device thing that I have in my hand right now, I'm pretty sure we're going to be conducting webinars, and we're already joining meetings from our phones, right? So great point.
Absolutely.
And Sonia says, interesting webinar, thanks. So thank you to all of you for showing up on a Friday. Have a wonderful weekend. A couple of quick points before I thank our presenter, Steve. He did share a book, Sticking Points, how to get the 4 generations working together in the 12 places that they come apart. Very interesting book, and thanks for sharing that link, Steve. And I shared it in the chat box, and if you got the event email, it was there as well. And then the handout is in the control pod. I forgot to mention you could download that handout right now by clicking on it. It'll open up a browser window, and then you could save it to your computer. But it's also going to be posted with this recording at the site website. And if you're a member, you can access all the archived webinars. So as a final thank you, Steve, it is so awesome that you are continuing to share your expertise and talents with SITE. So appreciative, and we hope to see you and everyone here at the SITE conference in June next year. Thanks so much, Steve.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and thank you everybody for attending today.
Yes.